Hello and welcome to this repair tutorial, and today we're going to look at an Arcam, and the model number is Alpha, and this is the 8R. 8R indicating that the amplifier is supplied with a remote control, and this remote control can be used to place the amplifier into mute, adjust the volume control, but all of the functions on the amp are manual in terms of operation. The amplifier was released around about 1999, and as you can imagine sold in very high numbers. In terms of general specification, output power for the amplifier into an 8 ohm speaker load is 50 watts per channel, and this will increase up to 100 watts if you're connecting 4 ohm speakers, and total speaker impedance you can go up to a maximum of 16 ohms. Frequency response is 20 Hz to 20 kHz, and total harmonic distortion comes in at 0.01%. And then in terms of input sensitivity, for your line input it's 275 millivolts. But what is a nice feature is that you have the ability via the rear push button switch to convert one of the line inputs to accept a moving magnet type cartridge if you connect a turntable, and there's no requirement then for an external preamplifier or equalizer. The amplifier also provides a preamp output, so if you wish you can connect the amplifier to additional power amplifiers. And then on the rear there is a function switch, but I'll come back to that later. It's referred to as the processor switch. In terms of overall dimensions, height is 85mm, width is 430 with a depth of 330, and then weight comes in at 4.5 kilograms. And then here when we look from the top, you can see a very nice circuit layout. I'm always a fan of the Arcam amplifiers. First and foremost is throughout the amplifier there are high quality components that are used. Particularly the electrolytic capacitors, you'll find that they are Rubicon, and if the amplifier has been running maybe for 25-30 years, if you put them on an ESR meter, they will still read very good within specification and also a low ESR overall. You can also see towards the rear there's a small little circuit board. This is where you see the input RCA connectors, and this is what we term as the processor switch, but as I mentioned we'll come back to this in a little while. And then here what I'm just showing you is the power input protection fuse. With the toroidal transformer that you can see, you have the ability to power the amplifier from a 120 volt AC supply or 230 volts, and it's a multi-tap primary. All that you have to do is just to remove the fuse and then insert the correct rated fuse into the other fuse holder. As with other tutorials, just be aware that sometimes these fuse carriers, the end clips can splay out, which can then cause an intermittent contact with the ends of the fuse. So it's always good practice just to check to make sure that they're tensioned correctly, and if they aren't, just take a pair of needle nose pliers and just squeeze them in and then snap the fuse back in position. Please note there can only be one fuse fitted, 130 volts or for 230 volts. You should never see two fuses fitted, and if you do, well, those fuses will blow on power up. I've also indicated here with an arrow just towards the front. All the Arcam amplifiers, and it was always a nice feature, they provided you with a spare fuse. And sometimes they come into the workshop and they could be maybe 30 years old and it's still the original fuses that are fitted. So sometimes if maybe you had a power surge and the fuse hadn't failed because of maybe a component failure, you've always got that spare fuse on board. And then here in terms of removal of the front fascia, that's probably one of the first things that you want to do. When you pull off the knobs from the user controls, what you'll find is, except for the volume control, there is a small felt washer which just makes sure that the plastic doesn't rub against plastic, and just pop those to one side. And then what you'll find is there are fixing screws left and right, so a total of 4 screws, and then you just unclip the bezel, and then there's 2 clips underneath, and then you can remove it. Sometimes what you'll find is that the edge of the bezel sometimes can become cracked, but it's the sort of plastic that if you use super glue, it will repair it instantly, and it's almost an invisible finish. You can't actually see where it has been glued, which is nice because some amplifiers use a different types of plastic, and often it's very, very difficult to sort of make a quick repair which is lasting, and you may resort to repair it maybe with an epoxy resin. And then here what I'm showing you is that the amplifier has now been removed from the metal chassis. What I would always say is if you're going to undertake this work, you don't need to remove the back panel. And that's important because if you maybe come in to test the amplifier, you can see that there are 4 heat sinks in total, one for each one of the MOSFET outputs. And if you remove the back panel, then of course you're disconnecting the heatsink and then the insulating washers from there. I'll just leave that in place. So you have a series of screws just to remove. Then there's a fixing bolt that goes through the toroidal transformer, and then what you'll find is that there is a grounding screw just towards the back of the power transformer because you have multiple grounding points on the bottom of the circuit board. And then what you'll find then that there is a series of silver screws. You need to ensure that when you're refitting the board into the chassis that these screws are firmly tight because these are the grounding points. Once you've done that, you'll find also as well that there's 4 additional screws that you have to remove just from the top, which will then release the amplifier including what I term as the metal cage, where you can see the user controls from the main chassis. And then what you can see here is that there's a yellow wire that goes all the way from the toroidal transformer, and it just goes into a set of terminals. You can just make it out, there's a small hole just to the right of there. That's where you have a PCB pillar, and you just need to press that in, and then you can extract the complete amplifier board from the chassis. And then here what we've done is we've just turned the board over, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to walk you through this. So what you can see is lots of red circles. So if we take the top right hand corner, these are your input RCA sockets, and what I'm highlighting here are all of the points where you will find cracked solder joints, and you should do this on any amplifier like this that comes in the workshop. So it's just a systematic approach here of just working across the board, so you can see, as I mentioned, the RCA sockets, so reflow all of those. And then the next thing that you're seeing is the first set of MOSFET outputs, and again you'll find that these are often cut very, very low down to the circuit board, and also the solder starts to break down because of heat, and also really a minimal amount of solder, so reflow. The next circle is pointing towards the speaker terminals, and it is not uncommon, again because of lack of solder during manufacture, to find that these will require reflowing. The next one is the next set of MOSFETs, so again reflow. And then what you can see is the power input Euro connector, and I'll give a magnification or a zoom in view of that in a moment, so reflow. And then as we move towards the front of the amplifier, at the bottom left, that is the headphone socket, and you'll often find one or two dry joints on there. And then the next circle is for one of the selection switches, and that is speaker selection 2. And then you have the balance, bass and treble controls. Again, you'll find dry joints. And then you also have the source direct switch, circle which you see just towards the center. And then the next part is that you have the tape input selection switch. And then finally, what you see are multiple solder joints, and this is the input selection switch. And then here, if we take a magnification view, you can already see that there are cracked solder joints here, and this is on the power input connector. So I'm just highlighting them for you. And then if we zoom in on the multi-input selector switch, what you can see here is a lot of solder joints, and often what you'll find is that these are just broken away from the board, and if you sort of wiggle the board slightly, you'll see movement. Now, what was the issue with this amplifier when it came in? Well, a customer contacted via the YouTube channel and reported intermittent loss of sound. So the work that you need to undertake is, as I say, you need to get the amplifier to a base position. So all of the things that you see in here are well known and well documented from the tutorials that I've done, and you just need to follow through and do all of this work. And in most cases you'll resolve all of the different issues with intermittent loss of sound, and then if the fault still remains, then you know that you're in a good position to carry out additional fault finding. So what you need to do is you just need to take the appropriate spanner or a pair of pliers and release the locking nut on the input channel selection switch. And then here what I'm showing you is the switch removed. What you have is a metal plate, and then you just squeeze the lugs straight, and then you can extract it. And then what you can see here is the first wafer of the switch. And what you do is you will take a fiberglass pencil and some degreasing fluid, and then you then strip down the switch, and what you need to do is just to clean up all of those contacts, and then apply, for example, De-Oxit lubricating grease. This is the number one issue associated with the intermittent loss of sound on these amplifiers, and this type of switch is not unique to Arcam. You'll see it on many other brands as well. So if you see, this is what you need to do. You're not going to be able to spray into there maybe some contact cleaner and then just rotate the switch backwards and forwards. It's really an encapsulator or enclosed type design, so you have to strip it down. But once it's done, then you'll have many, many years of operation with no issue at all. And then here what I'm showing you is from the rear of the amp. And then as you look towards the front where the multimeter is, you can see the series of controls. And we mentioned these a moment ago. So left hand to right, you can see your headphone socket, selection switch, and then you can see the individual potentiometers for your treble and bass controls, and then your other selection switches. But the volume control is slightly different. What you see there is that it has its own individual circuit board, and if you remove the locking screw from the front, you can just pull it away. And sometimes what you'll find is there could be dry solder joints on that circuit board where the potentiometer is soldered in. But what I've done here is I've just drawn a circle around two holes. You will need to clean the potentiometers and also the switches. So the other types of potentiometers, you also have holes, and the same with the switches. So you can spray into there, for example, De-Oxit, and you just operate them multiple times until you have no noise. As I mentioned in previous tutorials, I don't connect speakers, but I will connect a set of headphones so I can listen intently to make sure that during the cleaning process and towards the end of it, that I can't hear any noise. Now this amplifier had been stored in an environment where maybe there was moisture, so it could have been an attic. So from that you just get oxidization. So don't sort of rush this task, just spend the appropriate amount of time until these contacts are clean, and De-Oxit will clear it eventually. It's very rare nowadays that I come across an amplifier where the user controls are so bad that you have to do a replacement. And then here, when we look from the top view, as I said previously, you have this small circuit board which is just above the RCA sockets, and you can see that there's a signal cable coming off, and then that goes to the main amp board. Now this switch here is referred to as the processor switch. So what does it actually mean? Well, when you look from the back, there are two settings. One is set for normal and one is set for processor. Now basically what happens is, if you select processor, what it will do is it will fix the gain of the front controls. And the reason for that is, at this time period there was a lot of home cinema type equipment coming into the market, and what Arcam provided here was this fixed gain selection, so you could connect, for example, a home cinema processor directly. Now you may ask, well, what's the importance of this? Well, the reason being is, if it's fixing the gain, the contacts on this switch need to be clean. As with any audio signal, if you think about audiophiles who maybe spend thousands of pounds on their equipment, often what they're looking for is gold-plated connections and contacts, because what you want to have is the smallest amount of resistance possible for these small signals as they're passing through. So here, with the switch removed, you can see how bad it is. There's grease on there which has dried. There's also oxidization, and that's going to be a major issue. So you can imagine that that's setting the gain. What is the electrical resistance of those contacts? It's not going to be stable, and also as well, it's not going to be the lowest it should be, because it's not a clean set of contacts. So in the same way as you would clean the input selection switch, what you do is you spray a degreasing agent onto there, and that will remove all of the old grease. And then what you can take then is a fiberglass pencil and then just rub it backwards and forwards along those contacts. And what you can see here is after cleaning, and you can see how bright those contacts are. And it's a simple case then of just reassembling the switch and popping it back onto the small PCB, and then you don't have any issue associated with that dirty switch connection. The other thing here is that I've zoomed in on the speaker selection relay, and I've put the part number of the relay in the description for the video. This amplifier is probably circa 1999, so you're in 2024 now, and if it has been used extensively, those internal contacts will be oxidized, and you'll also see as well maybe pitting. So what we do here, just as a matter of course, we just simply replace that relay, just to ensure that we don't have any issues with intermittent loss of sound associated with the speaker protection relay. The other thing that I'm highlighting is you can just make out this yellow circle, and what I've done is I've circled it around the rear of the speaker terminals. And again, you might wonder, well, what's the importance of that? Well, what you can find is sometimes those nuts become loose, so you need to take a flat blade screwdriver just during repair and service and just rotate just to make sure that they're firm. Well, the last thing that you want is intermittent loss of sound, which could be associated with maybe one of the speaker terminals being loose. So that's just something you just do just to prevent any future issues. And then here what you can see, the input selection when you have a turntable connected. So there's a small hole on the rear, as we said, and then if you press that multi-pin switch, it will select in circuit this equalizer stroke phono stage, and it's using a single operational amplifier. Of course, it's a dual type, so you have it then for the left and then for the right channel. So once we carried out the work, so we've resoldered all the dry solder joints, we've done all of the cleaning of the user controls and switches, and then also the rear processor switch. Really, where do you go from here? Well, because all of that work has now been completed, you're at the point where you need to do the alignment. So what you can see here is the extract from the service manual, and this here is showing the right channel. And the two areas that we're pointing to are, first of all, the resistors, which you need to connect your multimeter set to millivolts across. And then also as well, we're pointing to the preset potentiometer, which you need to make an adjustment. Now, depending on which Arcam amplifier you have in the Alpha series, the millivolt reading that you need to adjust to will be different. So for the 8R, you have have a millivoltage range of 2.3 to 2.8 millivolts. And that just ensures that the MOSFETs are operating at their optimum operating specification. So here what you can see is this is the left channel, and this is before adjustment, as you appreciate, and you can see that it is high. It's up at 3.64 millivolts. So commonly you would leave the amplifier running for 20 to 30 minutes, stable environment, no drafts, and then you can see the multimeter has been connected across one of the resistors, and then what you do is you will adjust the preset for the respective channel. And what I do in the case of the 8R, I just set it for a nominal value of 2.5 millivolts, and then here you can see again this is now the right channel, but this is much higher. So it's up to 4.41 millivolts. So the MOSFETs really are being overdriven. So again, just make the adjustment, and then what you can see is we've adjusted the right channel so it matches the left, and it's now 2.5 millivolts. And then the amplifier just goes on to a test, normally for about 2 to 3 hours, and there's no issues or anything like that which were picked up. And then here I'm just highlighting to you is just this Omron relay. So this is the speaker protection relay. So that sort of brings us to the end of this repair tutorial. As I said, this is really, in terms of work, it'll probably take you about 2 hours from start to finish, but also as well depending on the condition of the amplifier. When this one came in, as I said, it had been stored maybe in a slightly damp environment, and also as well it required quite a lot of work cosmetically to clean it up. The front bezel particularly was very grimy, but once you do two-part cleaning process with a plastic restorer, what you'll find is the amplifier comes up and it looks really, really smart. The rest of the outer case for this amp was very good. There wasn't any damage to the top cover, and also as well the amplifier didn't have any sort of physical damage on the rear plate either, and it had all of the original features. So as always, I appreciate you stopping by, and if you require any help, support or assistance, by all means email Audio Amplifier Servicing at AOL.com, and I'll be more than happy to help you and provide any assistance or guidance that you may require. So until the next time, I wish you all the very best. Cheers and bye-bye.